Hello, user interface is very important, and animating that user interface will enhance it by 100 times. And throughout this tutorial, my goal is to explain and walk you through the process to create smooth, professional looking animations on control nodes in Godot and teach you everything you need to know to implement UI-based animations into your own projects. We will start by going over a simple in-code button scale effect, then working with an animation player to create open-close menu animations, along with a script to manage all those animations. If you have any questions throughout this tutorial, feel free to ask them in the comments below and I'll be sure to help you out. Subscribe to help other aspiring developers, and let's begin. Okay, so one thing I want to mention before we actually start with this tutorial is this is a follow-up video to this tutorial here, which I uploaded a few days ago, and it basically explains how every control node functions and the basics that you need to understand. Because you have to understand why control nodes work and how they interact with other control nodes before you can start to animate them. If you already understand how control nodes function and interact with each other, then you don't have to worry about going to watch that video. But if you don't, then I really recommend going to learn about the basics of control nodes, or you may get a bit confused here today. And we will be starting with this base project and animating it here today. So if you do want to follow along with this tutorial, then I will leave a link below to download this project and the finished project from this video for completely free. But that's kind of all I wanted to explain really quickly, and let's move into transforming this little scene that we have here into smooth animation and a very aesthetic feel. Okay, so to start, we're going to start by making these buttons here. For example, this button, all four of these buttons, and everything like that pop up whenever we hover over the button. Because right now, if we were to go and play the game, right, and click play and then play our scene, it's hard to tell that I'm hovering this button right now, right? Even though I am, it's hard to tell. So to fix that, we can go over here to our script and we can write in a little effect within our script that's going to allow us to change the scale of those buttons. And the way that we need to do that is we need to do it by grouping. Because, for example, if we come over here and we look at this button, we want this button to scale at a different rate than these buttons scale. So we need to group them. But we don't want to go over that first. We want to go over just how are we going to even scale the button. And to scale a button, we have to actually have access to that button. So to get access to the button, we're going to come up here and we're going to create some variables. We're going to create two export vars. One's going to be for our open menu button, and then the other one is going to be for our close menu button, right? And just like that. And then we can come over here to our pop-up menu in the inspector, and we can drag in our open button, which if we come into our base menu screen here and we see our base menu screen, vertical box container, this is the toggle button that open or that closes the menu. So this is our close button menu, right? And if we click up here and then we drag this into our we drag this into our export variable over here, which is our close menu button, we can assign that. Then if we close out of this and we come down here to this base menu open button, this is the open button. If we click this, we want to open up our menu. So we can come down here, grab this menu, and we can drag it right over here into our open button menu, and then that should be set to go. And now we have, and then now we have those two buttons stored within these variables so we can access them throughout our script. So we're going to need a function here, which is going to basically tween our buttons. It's going to tween the scale of our buttons. So we can say something like function button hover. We need to check if the button's being hovered. So we can say, okay, well, button, which is going to be of course a button, and then we can have our tween amount, so how much we're going to tween our button, and then we can also have a duration, which is just going to be how long that tween actually lasts, right? And to set these up, well, what needs to happen to scale a button? Well, firstly, we need to check to make sure that button that we're trying to scale is hovered. So if you see how this function is called here, this function is going to be called, and we're going to pass through a button, and we're going to pass through a tween amount, and we're going to pass through a duration. So for example, if we have function update button scale, right? In this button scale function, we're going to end up calling this button hover function. So we can say, okay, well, button hover, and then we want to call the buttons that we want to hover. So open menu, and we can set the amount. So maybe 1.5 and 0.02, right? And this is going to be the open menu button. And it's not going to just scale it, but we need to come down here and say, we're going to call this constantly, right? Because this is going to be in a process function. So we can say something like this, a process delta, delta. We need to throw that underscore over here in front, just like that. But process delta function, in here, we're going to just call this update button scale function. So basically we're going to be calling this over and over and over. And the reason that we're going to do it this way is because we're going to have multiple buttons, and we want to make sure that we're updating all the button scales based on if those buttons are hovered. So we need to call this button hover all the time, because this button hover here is basically just checking to make sure the button is hovered. So it's not going to do the tweening, but it's going to check if the button's hovered. So we can say, okay, well, if the button that we pass through dot is hovered, right? Then we want to call another function, which is going to be our tween function, which is going to be a button. We need to pass through our button. We need to pass through the property that we want to tween, which is going to be the scale, right? The scale of our button. And then we need to pass through vector 2.1, and then we need to multiply that by our tween amplitude, right? And then we can also pass through the duration through to this function. Now if we come down here, we have to create this tween function, right? And we need to receive the button. We need to receive the button. We need to receive the property, and then we need to also receive the amount, and we need to receive the duration. And this is all going to make sense when it comes together, but we have to create a new tween. So we can say var tween create tween, right? And then we can say, okay, well, tween dot tween property, and the property is going to be for our button here, and the property is going to be the property that we pass in, which for this is going to be the scale, the amount, and then the duration, just like so. And then now this is what's actually going to do the tweening of our button. Up here we're going to basically check if the button is hovered, then we're going to want to do the tween, right? And if the button is not hovered, then we want to basically tween the opposite way. So we can say button scale vector 2.1, and then we're not going to times it by tween amplitude, because if we did, then we would be scaling it up based on our tween amplitude number. If we just times it by nothing, then it's going to scale back down to its original size. So that's why we're going to leave that there, and then we can pass through duration as well, just like that. So basically, if we call this, it's going to constantly check if that button's being hovered. If the button is being hovered, then we're going to scale it. If it's not, then we're going to make sure it's scaled back down to vector 1. So if we were to click play and we were to run this scene, you're going to see that we are going to have a bit of an issue, because whenever this button launches, it launches to the side because it changes the scale, but we don't change the offset of the button. You see how that works? So it's not centering straight. So to make it center straight, we can come up here into our button hover, and we can just change the pivot offset of the button. So we can say, okay, button pivot offset is going to be equal to the button dot size divided by 2, right? And then if we play there, you're going to see that that's going to work like a charm, and it's going to scale perfectly straight up. If we were to click it, you're going to see it disappears just like it should, but all of our other buttons are not working. So how do we start all of our other buttons? Well, the best way to do that is going to be by doing it through groups. So to do it through groups, we're going to have to obviously have a ton of buttons up here, ton of button variables, and then we're going to group those into different groups. For example, we're going to have the var in menu buttons, right? And these buttons are all going to be scaled at a different rate depending on where they are. For example, the in menu buttons are going to be, if we open this up, the in menu buttons are going to be these 4 buttons. We want them to scale all accordingly the same. We want this button here, and we want this button to scale the same. And then whenever we open one of these, we want the 2 X buttons to scale the exact same as well, right? So we're going to have in button menus, which are all going to be in an array. We're going to have the close menu buttons, which are going to be those 2 X's that you saw. And then we're also going to have the pop-up menu, which are going to be the white long ones, right? Because we want those to look the same. So we can say toggle pop-up menu buttons, just like so. And then we can obviously go and create all of our other button export variables. So for example, instead of close menu and open menu, we're going to have open help menu and then close help menu, because we have a help menu. We have a settings menu. So we're going to also have to have a settings menu here, just like this. And we're also going to have a pause menu, which we haven't created yet, but we are going to go over later. So it's best that we do make these variables now. Just like this, pause menu, and we're going to have a button to close the pause menu, just like so. And then we're going to need one more, and this is going to be for our quit button that we do already have from the last tutorial, but we have a quit button, And the thing about the quit button is that you're not going to need 2 buttons for the quit button, because once you quit, you don't have a cancel quit, right? Unless you wanted to have that, then you could, but we don't. So we're just going to leave it just like this. And then we can come over here to our inspector on our pop-up menu and drag in all of our buttons over here in the inspector accordingly to where they are located. So for example, we can go down here to our vertical box container, open this, find our buttons, right? So we have our button container, and then we have our top row of buttons over here. And if we open up that, you're going to see we have our help button. This is going to be our toggle help button. So that would be basically the same as our open help button, right? And then we're going to have our pause button, which is going to be the same as basically our opening our pause button, because it is this. And if we click on it, we want to open that certain menu. This is going to be our settings button, right? Toggle settings menu. So we can drag that over here, and then we can say the quit button here is going to be to open the quit button menu. Now we can come down here and we can obviously close all this so we can keep it all nice and organized. And we can come down here to the help menu. If we open up that, you're going to see that we have an exit button. And this exit button here, we can move that over as our help exit button. And then we can come down here to our settings, and we can take this exit button and toggle this here. Whoops, we closed out of it. But this toggle settings menu button is going to be the same as our close settings button. And then right now we don't actually have a way to close our pause menu, but we will later on at the very end of this tutorial, where we go and create the entire pause menu from scratch, so you can see the whole process of creating another menu, right? But we can leave this as is. And I'm just noticing something up here. You can see how our exit button is actually behind a marginal container, which is going to store our entire display. And that's actually not going to be good, because it's going to lead us to not being able to click on some of this exit button. So we need to move this below it so that it shows in front. Now it's still going to show in front, but we need to move it in front so that it shows like the layering. This container layering is above the other container layering, so we can click on it over the rest of it, since it does take up such a small space. If we were to open it, you can see that the container is this big. And if we were to have it behind it, then we wouldn't really be able to click on some of this area over here. So we need to make sure that's in the very front there. But just a minor thing I just noticed. And then we can leave everything as is. Everything looks good. All our buttons are set up. And then now we can come into our script and create our grouping for these buttons, right? So to group these buttons, how do we want to do that? Well, we have our groups that we want to have, but we can set these groups up within a ready function. So we can say function ready, and we can set up these groups. So we can say, okay, well, our in menu buttons are going to be the buttons which are our open buttons for our help menu, settings menu, pause menu, and quit button, right? Those are our in menu based buttons. So we can say open help button, right, which is going to be a button. We need to grab our open settings button here, which is going to be another button that's in the menu. We need the open pause button, which is another button within our main menu there. And we're going to also have our open quit button, which is another button in our main menu. And again, let me just one more time. These buttons that are classified as our in main menu buttons are these 4 buttons here, right? So the open button for these different menus. The next we're going to make is the 2 toggle buttons. So it's going to be basically the open button and close button for our main menu. So if we say toggle pop-up menu buttons, which are going to be those 2 buttons. So we can say, okay, well, that would be our open menu button, which is our main button. Those are, in other words, the little white buttons that you see. And then we're also going to have a close button menu there, which is the one that pops up with the menu that allows us to close it. And then we also need to create our close menu buttons, which are going to be the little X's. And we're going to end up at the end of this tutorial having 3 of them whenever we create the pause menu. But since we don't actually have the close pause menu button, we can't use that. So right now we only have the close settings button, because we have a settings pop-up menu and we have an X to close that. And then we also have a close help menu button, because we do have an X in there as well to close that help menu. And if we do this, now all of these different buttons that we have are all grouped into their own arrays. And why are we doing that? Well, because we want the in menu buttons, since they're all located in the same area, right? These 4 buttons here, we want these 4 buttons to scale the exact same. We want this toggle button here and this toggle button here to scale the exact same as well. And then we want these X's to scale the exact same. So everything aligns the same. Because if we were to scale, for example, this white button here and this button at the exact same amplitude, are the exact same amount, then it's going to look funny because we need to scale this one much more than we need to scale this one. If we scale this one at the same amount that we want to scale this one, then this is going to be showing off the menu, right? Because if we double it, then it's going to be double the size that you see it now. So we don't need to double it. So we're going to have different numbers, and that's why we group it. So all of these are going to be scaled at the exact same amount. These two are going to be scaled at the exact same amount, and these two are going to be scaled at the exact same amount. And that's why we do it there. And then that's why we created this update button scale function, so we can set all of this up within this function. So for example, we can do some for statements. We can say for button, right? For button in our in menu buttons, right? We can call that button hover function. We can pass through whatever button we're currently checking, and we can pass through the numbers that we want. So maybe 4.8.02, right? And if we do that and then we go click play, you're going to see that all of those buttons are now going to work. This one down here is no longer going to work because we took it off, but you're going to see that these scale. And do you see how big that scales? So we don't want it to be that big, right? So we need to come down here and we need to move it down. Maybe we want it to be at 0.3, right? And then let's go try and see how that looks. We open up the menu and then you see how these scale, and that actually looks pretty good. I really do like that. So we're going to keep it at that. And then we can take this for statement. We can copy this for statement, and then we can just change out what group we're looking for. So now we're going to check for buttons in the other group. So maybe we want to do in the toggle pop-up menu buttons, right? Which are going to be our open and close. These we're going to want to scale a pretty big amount, because if not, we're not going to be able to see them. But I guess we'll leave it. Let's leave it the same and see how it looks, right? So let's click play. These are our toggle menu. You see how it's a tiny little increase? And it's almost like unnoticeable. While these, it's very noticeable on. And that's why we have to have different numbers. So maybe we want this one to scale twice as big, right? Our toggle menu, to open up our menu. And you're going to see how big that gets. Maybe you don't want it that big, but I actually kind of do like it that big. So we're going to leave it at that. Or maybe we can drop it just a little bit, maybe 1.8. And then maybe we want it to take a little bit longer to scale as well. So we can change up the duration. And then we can copy this, right? And then we can create those exit buttons. So 4 buttons in our close menu buttons, right? And maybe we want it to scale at 0.5, and maybe we want it to go at 0.2 duration. We can click play, and you're going to see now all of our buttons have this scale effect, which is really cool, and they all have different scale effects. So for example, this one scales. Over here, this one scales. These don't actually work yet because we haven't set them up, but we will at the end of this video, and then you can kind of see how all the scaling of the buttons do work now, and that looks very, very clean. So that's kind of how you do a simple in-code button scale animation or effect. And the reason that I really wanted to go over this today is because I wanted to show you that it's possible to do these effects through code. And if you kind of look at how this was set up, you can set up the exact same thing for any animation you want. Maybe it's a rotation animation. The only thing you would change is what you have right here, right? So you would have to most of the time change the offset so it's centered. So if you want it to rotate, it doesn't rotate around the corner, but it rotates around the center. And then right here, you would do whatever you need. So if it's tween the property, you would change the property. So maybe button scale property, and then you would change that property by this amount and this amount of time. And you could basically do any property you want just with this exact code. And that's why I kind of wanted to go over this, just to show it is possible to do these effects through the script. But the main part of today's video is animation and animating the opening and closing of the UI elements. And the way that is done is through an animation player. And it gets really complex. So we're going to move into that now, and I'm going to try and explain it in the best way that I possibly can. But remember, if you do have any questions throughout this tutorial, please ask down below. No question is a silly question, and I do really want to make sure that you understand this concept because it's so important when creating a game. UI is one of the main elements, so it's so important. So ask any question you have. And now let's move into the UI animations within AnimationPlayer and go over that. And to create these animations, we're of course going to need an AnimationPlayer. So we can add that under our pop-up menu, since this animation tree is going to control all the animations within this main pop-up menu here. And also real quickly, I want to go and rename these. So instead of it being help menu container, it's going to be help menu. And instead of setting menu container, we can leave it as setting menu. And then up here, we can just leave this as basically kind of our main menu. And the reason I want to do this is because it's going to be easier whenever we are trying to manage animations, whenever we get into the animation manager script. But for now, let's not worry about that, and let's focus on actually creating these animations within this animation tree here. And I'm actually just now realizing that we added an animation tree, but we need an animation player for this to work the way that we want it to work so we can create some animations, right? So we'll change that out to an animation player. And within this animation player, we need to create the animations. But let's think about this for a second. If we click this button down here, right, we want to hide this menu, but show this menu. And we need to do that smoothly through animations. If we click on this question mark button, then we want to show this menu and hide this menu. If we click on this X, then we want to show this menu and hide this menu. But we need a way to transition between them. So maybe if we open up our help menu, we can fade this one away and then fade this one in and so on, right? But maybe if we're here and we click on this, maybe we want the menu here to expand upwards and then expand outwards. So it looks like it kind of opens up in a cool way. And that's the way that we're going to create that animation, or at least that's my idea for this animation, and I think it'll look pretty cool. So to do that, we need to go down here and click on New Animation. And since we have to have an open animation and a close animation, we can just call this open underscore the name of the menu that we're going to be opening. So we're going to be opening up basically our main menu, so we'll just call it open menu. And within this animation, we need to understand what we actually are looking to do. So we need to see what we need to change to create an animation to look like this. The first thing that we're going to need to change, of course, is the visibility. So the first thing that needs to happen is this menu needs to become visible. So we can come down here to visibility, check it on, and then click on the keyframe and add that keyframe to our animation. And you're going to see that that is now visible. But if we come and open up this menu here and we start to look at these settings and what we need to change, if we come over here and change the color rect or the 9 patch rect, for example, let's say we wanted to take it off the x-axis so we can, expand it up. You're going to see all these buttons are just still going to be there. So what needs to happen whenever we're starting this animation? Since we're opening up the menu, we need these buttons and stuff to be gone. But maybe whenever our 9 patch rect gets to full size, we can add these buttons back. But let's create our 9 patch rect movement first, and then we'll cover that because that's something that we can worry about. But I'm just trying to let you know that with this 9 patch rect, we need, for example, this button here to disappear, and we need these buttons to disappear so that our 9 patch rect can start from 0, 0, and then expand outwards from there. But for example, we can do this the hard code way and say, okay, well 0, 0, that's the smallest our 9 patch rect can be, right? We can add that as a minimum size. Then maybe we can come over here to like 0.133, and we can make it expand on the x-axis to its original x-axis size, which is 160. We can pin that, and then we can come over here. Let's make this animation about 0.4 seconds long. We can come over to the end, and we can make this animation its full size that it should be. So that would be 350, and then we can pin that. And you're going to see if we start that from the beginning, how that looks. It kind of expands up and then out. But these buttons, is what I'm trying to say, are looking very, very funny there, right? And they don't look like they should. So to fix that, we can actually have them fade in. So we can start these buttons and stuff off as invisible, or the visibility equal to false, by opening up our 9 patch rect, going to our margin container, and this is what stores our button and our stat display. So we can just take this entire margin container here and turn its visibility to false at the start of this animation. And then later on, maybe at the 0.2, maybe when it gets to about this size here, right? We can say, okay, we want to make it visible, but not visible completely yet. Let's make it invisible still, but let's just make it there, right? So we can, whoops, we pinned the self modulate and not the modulate, right? So we can basically we're changing the A value here of the color, which is going to make it invisible. We can pin that, and then maybe we can say, okay, at 0.4, we want that to be fully visible, which means it's going to have this fade effect because it's going to go from invisible to visible. And you can kind of see how that looks. That looks pretty cool. So this is now our new animation, which looks pretty cool. Maybe we also actually need to make it fade a little bit shorter like this, right? So our 9 patch rect has more time to open up, and that looks pretty cool. But now you see this button at the top. We have to kind of worry about all this, and this is where earlier in the video I was stating that you need to really understand the basics and why things do the things they do. So even though our 9 patch rect here is set to 0, 0, this button is still making it wider on the x-axis, so we need that button gone. And this button here, if we zoom out of everything, is going to be within our base menu scene, our VBox container, and it's going to be this toggle menu button. So we can take this button here and change it to be invisible by coming down here to, where is it? All the way down here to visibility, and basically setting it to invisible. And then now you're going to see how small that 9 patch rect really is. And then maybe when we get to about this size, because that's where the button needs to come in anyway, right? We can say, okay, well, let's set it to visible, and let's also make it fade in, because that would look pretty cool, right? So we can fade it in to maybe about this long, right? Set it to full color, and then this is now our new open animation. And that actually looks pretty cool, and I do like the way that that looks. So we will stick with that, but we also need to realize that whenever we open up the menu, we need to hide this bottom button. So we can come down here, and we can say, okay, well, we want that to fade out. So we can say visibility, at the start, we want it to be visible, and then we want it to have full color, and then maybe over the span of 2 seconds, we want it to fade to no color, and then whenever it does hit no color, we can just turn its visibility to false, and it will hide it. But this is kind of how our animation is going to look. And from a distance, that does actually look very cool. So we click the button, and it's going to fade away and open up the menu just like that. And then that's going to be our open menu animation. Now, we're also going to need a way to close the menu. So we can take this animation, duplicate it, and just call this our close menu animation. And we basically have the same animation. It's still the open animation because we duplicated it. But if we think about this, how could we change this a little bit? Well, we need it to do the exact opposite of what it did at the start. So we want it to start at its full position, and we want it to end at 0, 0, right? So now we're going to have it basically shrink down just like that into nothing. But if you think about it, a closed menu animation is basically just going to be the exact opposite of the open animation if you want it to look the same. So basically, whenever we start, we want our margin container to be visible. So we can check this to visible. We want our margin container to fade away. So we can make it perfectly visible now, and then we can have it fade over the span of like 1 second. Then we can make this visible and have it fade, right? Because this is the toggle button. This is the top button up here, and we already click it. So we want it to start to fade away. And then whenever it does fade away, we can make its visibility set to false. Same with that margin container, which stores the buttons and everything. And then now you're going to see what happens is whenever we do start, we start with everything, and it all starts to fade away. And if you look at that, it's like maybe we want that to fade a bit sooner. So we can make it fade a bit sooner by moving the modulate A value of 0 a little bit closer. And you're going to see exactly how that works. And it's going to shrink to none, and then it's going to shrink all the way down. And when that does happen, right, we need that base menu button to come back. So we can go find that base menu button and say, we want it to start this animation invisible because the menu is open. But eventually, we want this base menu button to be visible again for us to interact with. So we can change it to visible and make it self-modulate kind of fade, or its modulate color fade in. And you're going to see that is a very quick fade. So we can make that fade much longer, maybe almost the entire duration of the animation would be a good guess for me. We can replay this and say, let's open up our menu, right? Whoops, we're not even looking at our menu. But let's open up our menu. That's how it looks. And then let's go close our menu and see how that looks. And you can kind of see how that looks. Now this little dot, whenever it disappears, it's almost going to be unnoticeable. So we can leave that. But that's kind of how that looks. And then the open menu. Just like that. And that looks like a pretty good open menu and closed menu animation. And I do really, really like the way that that looks. So we will stick with that. But hopefully you understand kind of how everything's going together and why things are working the way they work. So you have to move the 9 patch rect, which is a container. Or it's not a container, but the margin container under the 9 patch rect here in the menu is a container, right? And so this container is a full rect on the 9 patch rect. So it's the same size as the 9 patch rect. So it's going to change sizes based on that, which everything in that container is also going to change sizes. So you have to account for that when you're doing the animations, right? Now, for the next 2 animations, we're going to make them much simpler because it's just going to be a nice fade in animation. While this one, we're messing with the size of the container. So if we did want to do that, we can say, okay, well, animation new. What animation do we want to create? Well, we want to create the open help menu animation. Now remember, whenever I'm naming these animations, I'm naming it open or close underscore and then the exact name of the node that that menu consists of, because when we move into the animation manager script, that's going to come in handy, and I'm going to show you why. But for example, here on this animation, maybe we want it to be much shorter. We just want it to quickly open up the menu that we want to look at. So we can say maybe 0.2 of a second, right? and we can zoom in and start to work on this. So whenever we open up the help menu, what's going to be visible? This is going to be visible when we first open up the help menu. So we can come to this menu, we can make sure it's visible just like that. And then at some point we want this menu here to become invisible. So we can say maybe at point 1 we want it to be completely invisible, or maybe at point 2 we want it to be completely invisible. And then throughout this time we want it to fade. So at the start, whenever it is visible, we want its self-modulate to be equal to full. And by the end, when it fades away or when it disappears, we want its self-modulate to be equal to 0. You're going to see now you're going to get a nice fade between that there. But while that's fading away, we want this help menu down here to appear. So at the start, we can say, well, we want it to end up becoming visible. But while the other one fades away, we want it to start basically kind of invisible. But we want the node itself to be visible, basically visible in the scene tree. But since we're changing the color, it's still going to appear invisible because the color is a transparent. But it is still there. It's just transparent. And over the time that it is opening up, we want it to appear just like this at full value or full transparency. And you're going to see kind of how that looks there. That is a nice, smooth, clean animation. And then we're going to have to duplicate this animation because we need it to have a close animation as well. So we can call this our close help menu animation. And what do we want to happen here? Well, we basically want the exact opposite to happen. We want our help menu to start visible. So we can flip this here, right? Basically like this. And we want it to slowly fade away as time goes on. And by the end of it, we want our help menu to be invisible. So we can add an invisible key there, or visible in the scene tree. I hope you understand that. Whenever I say visible and invisible, I'm kind of talking about whenever I'm messing with modulate, I'm talking about transparency. Invisible, I'm talking about actually visible within the scene tree, right? And up here, we want it to start. We can remove this here because we need it to start visibly in the scene tree, right? Because we want to start a fade. And to start a fade, it has to be in the scene tree, because if it's not in the scene tree, we're just going to be changing the color of a node that's not even there. So, and then at the end of it, we don't want it to disappear. So you're going to see how this is going to work. It's going to fade in just like this, and the other one's going to fade out. But then whenever it hits this keyframe, it's going to disappear. So we need to get rid of that keyframe. And then you're going to see how this looks here. And it's going to basically fade right on back to how it was before. So if we open help menu, and then if we close help menu, just like that. And those are the help menu animations. But we also are going to need an animation for our settings menu. And I want to make that the exact same as the help menu. So it's going to be kind of basic, but it is going to be the exact same. So we can say, instead of open help menu though, open setting menu. And instead of messing with the setting menu stuff here, we can go to instead of messing with the help menus properties, we can mess with the setting menu property and basically mimic exactly what we did for the help menu, because we still want the same thing to happen for our menu, but we just want our help menu to become visible, and we want our we want our settings menu to become visible, and we want our settings menu to fade in. So we can do this, fade it in, just like that. And then we can remove, right here, we can remove these keyframes for our help menu. So now, if we look at our settings menu, it's going to look, if we hide our help menu there as well, it's going to look just like this and fade into our settings menu, which looks good. And then we can go back to our close help menu, since we're going to be doing the same thing. Duplicate this as our close settings menu. And if I'm just speaking in circles right now, please let me know in the comments, and I'll be sure to help you out and try and explain what I did in a little bit of a different way to hopefully have it resonate with you. But we can mimic the exact movements we made here with our help menu as well on our settings menu. So keyframe, and then we can keyframe that there as well. You're going to see that's going to be a close on our settings menu, just like that. But we need to remove our help menu here because we don't want that visible. And that's kind of how that's going to go, right? The close and then the open on our settings menu. And that is all of our animations. They're complete. So hopefully that makes a bit of sense, but we have a open animation for every menu we have and a close animation for every menu we have as well. And if you didn't understand anything I did there, then please let me know so I can help you out. But now we need to manage these animations based on when the buttons are clicked. And to do this, we need to go into our script and work in our script. And it's actually going to be pretty simple. So we have all of our menus saved up here. And if you didn't know, this export variable that is called menu screen is saved as this node, because if we go out here, you're going to see that menu screen is saved as this menu, help menu screen is saved as this help menu, settings menu screen is saved as this settings menu. So whenever I come down here and I want to call the toggle visibility function and toggle the visibility of our menu screen, I want to toggle the visibility of menu right here. And that is actually the name that we will be pulling, right? So for example, if we were to right here say print the name or menu screen dot name, right? So basically when we click that button, we should print the menu screen dot name. We're going to get an error because nothing's connected to it, but you're going to see that it's going to print menu, which is just right there. If we were to take this here and let's, for example, print something else right now. Let's maybe print our help menu screen. What I'm trying to show you is it's going to be clear right after this one. If I click on this button, you're going to see that it's going to output help menu, which is the name of this node because they are stored within that variable. And what's unique about that name? Well, if we come look at our animation, you're going to see that that's help menu. It's the exact name that we put as the backhand of all of these animations, right? So the first one returned menu, the second one returned help menu, and that's the menu that we want to open based on our animation. And to do that, we need to decide, are we opening the animation or are we going to do a close animation for whatever menu we're trying to open? So we need to decide that within our toggle visibility. So if we remove this now, and we can also remove this, and then we can also remove our menu screen and our menu screen, because when we open our settings menu, our help menu, we don't need to toggle our menu screen's visibility anymore because we do that within the animation. But what I'm trying to get to is up here in our toggle visibility. First of all, we need to get access to our animation player. So we can say var animation equals to our animation player. And then we're going to need one more variable, and this is going to be var animation type, right? Because since we have two types of animations, we need to figure out what type of animation we're going to be playing for whatever object comes in. And one more thing, basically what I was saying with the name thing, if we come here and we print object.name, we're basically taking menu screen, and then we're going to, so for example, if we toggle visibility of menu screen is going to become object. If we take object.name, we're basically taking menu, which again is the backhand of this animation. So if we know what we're doing with the animation, if we're closing or opening it, then we can say, okay, let's add a string of close underscore to the object.name, and then we're going to get the exact name of our animation, and we can play it that way and have our script very, very modular, right? So again, if we were to play this, you're going to see if we click this, you're going to see it's going to paste menu, which is exactly what we need. So since that happens, we can come down here and we can say, okay, well, if the object dot is visible, so if the object is visible, whatever menu we're messing with, if it is visible, well, we want to close it. So we can say, okay, well, the animation type that we want to play is going to be close underscore, right? If that's not true, then we want to open up the menu, right? Because that means the menu is not visible. So if the menu is not visible and we're trying to toggle the visibility of it, then we want to play the open animation for that menu. So we can say open underscore, right? And then down here, we can just call our animation play, and we can create the animation name that we're going to need. And basically what that animation is it's going to be animation type plus a string of that name of our object. So object.name. And that's why I lined up these names here the same as our animation name in here. So we could do a script like this. Now what's going to happen? Well, if we click on this button, we're going to end up toggling visibility of our menu screen. So menu screen is going to be pasted in as object. Then we're going to say, okay, well, if object is visible, so basically if the menu is visible, then we want to play the close animation. So we're going to get the close prefix, and we're going to add that prefix to the name of menu, and it's going to come back as close menu, this exact animation, and it's going to play that animation. So if we come down here and we click play and we launch this scene, you're going to see that it's already set up there weirdly because it's visible already. So let's see what's going on. Let's add in a print statement down here. Let's say, okay, so we're getting the close animation. So we can print off, all right, let's actually print off what we're trying to call. Is it coming back as the right name? Which obviously it isn't, but we can just check and see what's going on here. A bit of debugging, right? So it's closing the menu, which means it's already open, which means maybe it's within our reset here. And that it looks like the problem. So all this stuff automatically saves into the reset, which we honestly don't want any of it. So let's go clear out our reset animation. So whenever we do reset, or whenever we do play the reset animation, it comes back as exactly what we wanted over here, which is having this button, the only button visible. So now if we were to play, let's see what happens. This scales up, it opens up, we click on this, it plays all of the animations just like we want the animations to be played. And that looks good, but it doesn't close, it doesn't hide the menu, does it? So that's an issue. So we can come down here to our animation player. That's in our close menu animation, right? And menu is visible, but by the time it gets to nothing, right? So about right here, we want menu to be invisible. So we can end up adding in a keyframe, and we can turn the visibility of that off. And if we were to restart our scene here by saying we want the base menu button open, which is our start menu, and we click play on this, you're going to see that that does work. It did start in a funny way. Let's go to our animation. Let's go to our reset. Menu's starting off as visible, which is not what we want. So we can take that away. Hide menu. Make sure our base menu button is visible there. And then we can play the game, and you're going to see that everything should come back as working perfect. So we open up, we can close, open up the help, close, open up the settings, close, and everything is very, very smooth and very, very nice. And all of our animations are coming together, and they're working perfectly together, which is very good to see, right? And that is kind of how you create a simple animation player. Now, the more animations you get, the easier it's going to get, because you don't have to, or it's not going to get easier, but you're not going to have to create all of this again because it's modular. If we just call toggle visibility and pass through the menu that we want to do, and our animation names are lined up the correct way, then everything should come together perfectly. And to demonstrate that real quickly, I want to make a pause menu, and I'm going to do this pause menu in sort of a time lapse, and I want you to watch exactly what I'm doing and kind of follow along with what I'm doing and try and understand how everything's going. And then after, I'll explain how it's set up and how everything happened, right? So let's hop into that right now. And so there we go. I've created a simple pause menu right here, if we can see it. So it looks like this, and I've created two animations for it. We have the open pause menu animation, which looks like this, and then we have the close pause animation that looks like that, right? And why I ended the time lapse is because I want to explain to you how you would implement this, right? So we created a new menu. We created animations for it. How hard is it to implement it into the script that we've worked on here today? Well, let's implement this and see how long it takes, right? So first of all, we need a export var for the close pause button, which we already have. But then we're also going to need an export variable for the pause menu screen, right? Which is going to be a margin container, because that's what the base of this pause menu here is, and the name of the pause menu, which is what the animation is based off of, right? And then we come up here to pop-up menu. We can assign pause menu down here to pause menu. And then we can assign this pause button here to our close pause button. And then we can send a signal from this pause button, right? A pressed signal from this pause button to our pop-up menu. And then we can come up here into our main menu, go down and find out where we have our buttons, right? Which our buttons are going to be right here in our button container. And the pause button is the second button on our top row. So we can take that pause button and send a signal to the same exact function here. And then once we have that, we can come back into our code, and we can basically call these animations the same way that we've called these. So we can say, okay, well, let's toggle the visibility of the pause menu screen, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to come up here and it's going to say, it's going to grab the name and it's going to play the animation based on the name and based on the type of animation that we should be playing based on what button we've clicked, right? So if we are to go and set this scene up out here the way that it should be on start, which is going to be with the menu visible, everything else visible except for this button right here, right? And then if we were to click play, see what happens. You're going to see that the pause menu is going to start. And the reason that the pause menu start is because of our animation reset. Yeah, we need to clear all this out. So we can clear all this out real quick. Then we can click play. We can hide this pause menu, and then we can hide this menu, and then we can click play on our scene, right? And you're going to see that everything works as it should. The how to play comes up, the settings come up, and if we click pause, the pause menu comes up. If we click this button, it goes back to this menu. Now, one more thing. Did you see how our button here doesn't have a hover? How would we go and add a hover? Well, we can come back into our pop-up script here, up to where we have our hovers, right? And we can just add in the pause menu as a close menu button, and it will play based on this. So we need to add it to our close button group. We can just add in our close pause button just like that. So it's with these other buttons here, and we are going to now check to scale it up right here, right? So if we were to click play now, and you're going to see that now if we open up our menu, open up our pause screen, it scales whenever we do hover it, and it looks nicely just like that. And I think that covers about everything that I have planned to go over here in this tutorial. I hope you now have a better understanding of how to do different things involving animations around control nodes. For example, those in-screen animations that we just did with the button or with the animation player that we've been working on all video. And even maybe how to manage those animations within a script. Remember, if you have any questions at all or you're confused about any part of this tutorial, please feel free to ask me in the comments. No question is a silly question, and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was able to provide a bit of value. And until next time, stay safe and have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless and bye-bye.